and welcome to Indo Politics, coming to you from the European Parliament here in Strasbourg. And I'm chatting today to Kathleen Funchion, the Irish MEP for Ireland South, and Sinn Féin MEP. Thanks very much for talking to us, and good to see you here. You've been an MEP for over a year now.
Yeah.
How has the change been from Dáil politics coming out here?
So we're coming up on a year and a half, which is kind of hard to believe in one way. It was a huge change from the national politics and the issues, I suppose, that you're addressing in the Dáil, even just the physical buildings, and you're going from, we've over 700 MEPs all competing here together. But I've really enjoyed it. I feel like there's good collaboration amongst the Irish MEPs on issues that we do need to be fighting on together, because we are one of the smaller countries. I think it's really important that our voices are heard.
So maybe a little less adversarial than Dáil politics when it comes to the Irish MEPs.
I think it's definitely less adversarial. In one way, when you look at the debates, it can seem very adversarial in terms of the various groups. But I think, kind of outside MEPs working together and working through committees, I think there's a good structure on things. Very, very interesting time as well, in terms of, and a worrying time, I would say, in terms of the focus on security and defence. And it seems that every time we're talking about something, there is, discussions about more money for militarization and more money kind of for weapons. And that is, I think, a very worrying time. I think we really need to hold strong in terms of our own Irish neutrality and our position on being military neutral. So that, I suppose, is an interesting dynamic. And, while you're an MEP, I think, for me, I was a councillor once upon a time, I was a TD, so people still come to you with their own everyday issues, whether it's cost of living, housing, issues around, children with disabilities. So people are still coming to you for that representation as well. It's maybe on a different level, but I think it's always important to bear that in mind, that we're all here to get the absolute best that we can for Ireland and for the people of Ireland.
And yet you talk about increased defence spending. People will say that Ireland is naive in not really knowing or accepting the challenges that we face. And the Financial Times said Ireland is a mere bystander now in its own defence. So do you not accept we're part of a union and that needs to be protected, particularly at this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great to be a part of Europe. And, I always say I'm someone that had a trade union background. I'm very strong on the issue of women's rights, and there are two areas in particular where actually Ireland has really benefited from EU legislation. And I think actually we might still be quite behind the times in Ireland on those issues if it hadn't been for the EU. And I do think it's really important for people to work together. But I think if you go back to how the EU was formed and why it was formed in terms of it being a peace project, I think we need to look back towards that as well and not forget that. I think every country, and of course it depends on where you are geographically. I know there's countries, really concerned, really worried about threats, and I think, they're very real issues for them. But I do think that each individual country needs to be respected in terms of its views on neutrality. I think it's served us really well to be a neutral country. I think we've a huge standing in terms of our peacekeeping over the years. And I've always speak about the Good Friday Agreement as well, and think that we actually have huge expertise from all sides and from across all political spectrums in that area, that I think we could be using that a little bit more than we do. I think when you look at how uncertain times are in the world, something like the Good Friday Agreement should be really, we should look at that and be really proud of the fact that nearly 30 years later it's still standing. At times I know it's had difficulties, but I think that's where we need to focus and we need to look on. And I really feel strongly that we need to maintain our military neutrality. And
one of the pros of Ireland's EU membership, we were always told, was that the EU had advocated strongly for women's rights and brought about changes to laws in Ireland, whether it's equality in employment or maternity leave. Do you think the European Union still holds that mantle, standing up for women's rights?
I think it's getting more difficult. I think that's, to be really honest and to be a bit brutal about it. I'm on the FEM committee, the Gender Equality Committee. It's definitely more of a battle. You can see that when we're talking about various reports. Now, I will say that, there was a report recently that recognised, kind of femicide, and I think that's really important. And there is still kind of good things being achieved. I think we need to remember that. But definitely the dynamic is changing, and I agree.
Why is that? Just more
where I suppose
ideological right-wing MEPs?
I think that the Parliament has changed in terms of what it would have been in the past, and we are definitely seeing kind of far right and more right-wing MEPs, and that will obviously have a knock-on effect on all committees. But I do think it's worrying times in relation to women's rights, and particularly around reproductive rights and access to proper health care, and access to kind of sexual health education, access to abortion services where they're needed. So I think we have to really make sure that we come together on those issues. Those of us, that might on other days have different views on other policies and politics, but certainly, we can't see a rollback.
So are you saying things that the FEM committee is coming up with are being resisted?
I think it's harder to...
And is Ursula von der Leyen, because she's part of the European People's Party, which is sort of, veering to the right, is her party, which holds a majority here in the European Parliament, resisting some of those reforms?
Not at a FEM committee level. I would say when you get into the wider debates in the actual plenary or in the chamber, let's say, there's times where the EPP we do see them siding with the far right. However, in FEM and in terms of the women's rights issue, we haven't seen that happen yet. So I think we are holding, but I think it's one that we have to be careful about, and it's one that we have to constantly keep an eye on and not take for granted, because you can just see through the debates and the discussions that there's a lot more resistance than would have been. During the last mandate, there was a directive that got a huge kind of acclaim as such. I'm not sure if we were discussing that directive now, would we be able to get it passed? I'd like to think that we would, but I think it is one that we definitely need to be keeping a very, very close eye on.
A member of that committee, Swedish MEP Abir Al-Shahlani, she was speaking here in a debate to mark the International Day of the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And we're just going to have a quick listen to what she had to say.
We stand in orange and we stand in fury. We are furious because still women are controlled, beaten, raped, and murdered by men in the EU. Let me be very, very clear. This is not a woman's problem. Gender-based violence is a man's problem. And to the men in this room and beyond, unless you choose building safety over staying in your comfort zone, nothing will change. Unless you choose respect over dominance, nothing will change. Unless you are the ones who change the norms among the male population, call out that friend's sexist joke, challenge the lies, call out your uncle's shitty opinions about women around the Christmas dinner table.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Al-Shahlani.
We wear orange for hope, but hope means nothing if you're not courageous enough to look in the mirror and see how you yourself have been enabling gender-based violence.
How did you feel listening to that particular clip?
Yeah, well, actually, a number of us, when she finished, gave her a standing ovation. She got a huge round of applause, and I've seen her in the FEM committee, and I think she's excellent in terms of what she's bringing forward. I find myself, even though we're in different political groupings, I find myself regularly agreeing with her. I think that she was 100% right that she said, that the issue of, gender-based violence and sexual violence, it is a male problem, and we do need to see the men in the room coming on board, calling out things when they see it, not taking situations for granted, making sure that they're calling it out where they see it. And I really do think, as well, as we're talking about the change in dynamics of the politics of the Parliament, that more and more we need kind of our male colleagues to come on board with this issue and ensure that they're talking about it too, that it isn't just seen as a women's problem. And we often do see really good conferences and, debates like we had yesterday. And it is primarily women speaking. And obviously that's really, really important. But we do also need the men to come on board and start calling it out as well.
And you, of course, have also spoken about your own lived experiences. Your ex-partner was jailed for 4 months under what's known as Coco's law.
Yeah.
So a lot of people might have seen that and said, you were a very high-profile politician at the time. You were a member of Sinn Féin's front bench.
Yeah.
So how were you sort of keeping your head above water through all that?
It was very difficult at times, I will say. It was one of those situations where, I went through phases where I just kind of had to block out everything that was happening in order to be able to focus on my own job, my work. I felt really strongly that I wanted to try and keep working, and I was chairing the Children's Committee at the time. I really, really enjoyed that role, and I didn't want to have to take a step back from that. So, now I will say I had great support from family, from certain friends, but it was a lonely time as well, because of course, obviously, when you're in the you're waiting for decisions to come back from the DPP and you're waiting for your court date, you can't talk about that while it's going on. So it's only afterwards and once there's a conviction that you can talk about it. So there was days where it was difficult, definitely, and you do need a good support around you. And I suppose it really made me see as well how difficult the process can be in terms of the court process, in terms of feeling just that absolute dread, that sickening feeling when you have to go to court, and then sometimes cases are adjourned, and sometimes then there's a change in date and the whole process takes so long. Anyone that's gone through that will know that it can feel very frustrating at times, and you're sort of thinking, gosh, like, did I do the right thing? To be really honest, you do question yourself, but having come through it, I'm so glad that I did do it, and I'm so glad I did stick with it. And when I spoke out, I was nervous as well about, when you're in politics, you're kind of always wondering when you reveal, part of a very personal part of your life, how it will be perceived. But I have to say, I was so glad that I did speak out, because the amount of people, primarily women, that have contacted me as a result, and some people are maybe have gone through a similar situation and just reaching out. But other people, a lot of family members actually of people that they feel are in those kind of relationships as well, reached out just to be like, what should we do, or where should we go? And obviously we've signposted people to various services and everything. We're conscious that myself and anyone working in my office were not trained professionals in that regard. But even just, I felt glad that people felt that they could speak to me and they could say, where do you think we should go with this? And, so, yeah.
And important that someone in a high profile position who people might look at and say, well, she's a very, formidable, strong woman, that this can happen to anybody.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that was really important as well, that it can happen to anybody. And I kind of it took me a while to come to terms with that as well myself, because you do see yourself as, like you're involved in public speaking, you're involved in debates, you think, that you'll be kind of able for situations, and it shows you that this situation can affect any woman, and that's why I think having the non-judgmental services are so important, because I had a number of phone calls and a number of interactions with Amber, who's the women's refuge in Kilkenny, before I eventually left the situation. And it does take, you are kind of you keep saying to yourself, maybe things will change, or you think you see a slight change in behaviours and you're thinking it'll be okay now. And you're constantly kind of nearly reassuring yourself, saying it will be different, and when on some level you probably know it won't. But that's why having somewhere that you can have that same conversation with 100 times if you need to.
So it's a difficult situation to.
It is, because you have to kind of come to terms with the fact that this isn't, this is someone that you loved, this is someone that you thought you were spending the rest of your life with, and then that's clearly not the case. And it can be hard, I think, I know for me certainly it was hard to accept that element of it. And I'm so glad that there was people that you didn't feel like, that they were thinking, oh, here she goes again talking about the same thing. And, you know, it's like it's a really, really safe space as such. And it's good for people to know that you kind of think people know that those services exist, but maybe not everybody does. So it's good to kind of get that information out too.
And the Cabinet has approved Jenny's laws,
Yes.
it's called, which is creating a register of people convicted in court of domestic violence. Should that include situations where it's coercive control?
I really think it should. I think it would be really important, and I think that the element that maybe the Gardaí as well are allowed to give warning, I think that would be a really important part of it. And I think it will be so helpful for people going forward. And I also think as well, like, you know, that came as a result of someone that tragically lost their life, the ultimate worst outcome ever. And in fairness to Jenny's family, that they have, you know, campaigned and fought for this, and in a time of the worst time of their lives, that they've put that kind of front and centre. They have to be really commended, and I do think that it should cover all victims, and I think that would be a really positive change, and maybe an example that we could use then, because one of the things I think about being an MEP is we need to start where we are doing things well in our country, trying to promote and spread that, and then also learning from other countries' best practice too. But I really hope that that's something that we could maybe grow on, you know.
Okay, and the mother and baby home survivors were here in the European Parliament not so long ago. How do you think that is working now? The law is going to be reviewed next year. What do you think needs to change?
Yeah, so I was delighted to have some of the mother and baby survivors over. They were a group I really enjoyed working with, and to this day I just have huge admiration for them, but I also just feel so angry at how they continue to be treated. Like just this week there was reports that the database that their information is in isn't fit for purpose. And like, what happens if that information ends up disappearing? You know what I mean? So, and there's a number of changes I think need to happen. There's still barriers for people trying to access information. We still have women that like are well into their 70s and over that at this point of their lives, trying to find children that were taken from them. That definitely needs to be, the information, the access to information. I know some people have gotten, really good details about their situations, and they've gotten like original birth certs that they never had. But for some people, there's still barriers. So I think that does need to be looked at. The redress then, it should be open to all institutions. It only covers the ones that were dealt with in the Commission of Investigation. It should cover all of them. And also the 6-month rule needs to go. And the thing about it is there's a very small portion of the money has been spent. I think it's only around between 10 and 15% of the money that was set aside for redress has been spent. So the money is actually there. And I think that could be one way that they could really show people that they were sincere that time in their apology. And then there is issues around children who were boarded out, that their particular situation being sent to families, maybe to work on farms and to work, kind of in a domestic situation. That part was never recognised. And in fairness, since then, minister after minister has acknowledged that has not been dealt with. So I think they should deal with that as well. And I think they should take the review of the legislation as their opportunity. But I always think of those women that are still looking for now adults. Yeah. And they really do deserve the state to do everything in their power to try and help them to find out what happened. I can't imagine. I think, you think of your own kids, you think as a mother, how you could ever think you have no idea what happened to your baby. It's actually so cruel when you think about it.
Yeah, and we were speaking earlier about the kind of rollback on advancing women's issues in the European Parliament. Do you think it's harder now to be a woman in politics than it was before, or is it getting easier?
That's a really interesting question, because sometimes I say, if I was to start getting involved now, I wonder sometimes, would I? So when I was elected to the council, it was back in 2009. I've been in Sinn Féin since 2003. And sometimes I wonder, because I still remember setting up Facebook for the first time, setting up Twitter in the run-up to those elections. Actually, I only got Twitter in the run-up to the 2015 by-election. It was a very, very different time. And yet it's actually not that long ago. Yeah. And it's become so toxic. Like, I do feel we need to encourage more women. I love to see more women coming forward. But to give a very honest answer, sometimes I wonder, would I get involved now if I was only starting out? Because I do think it's become so toxic. that, you know, it's becoming so difficult. And I think one thing that could definitely be done to address the issue, and this wouldn't just be for politicians, this would be in general, is this kind of anonymous people on social media that can just, you can set up an account, no pictures, no verification, and off you go, and you can say what you like, and you have like the impact that has on particularly women, and it's often appearance driven on women, and
And Gráinne Shoiga, who ran in Galway West for Fianna Fáil, she told the Sunday Independent that it was the biggest regret of her life. She was subjected to misogyny, but she also spoke about an AI-generated image of her, fake image, pornographic in nature, and how upsetting that was, and how she said she nearly vomited when she actually saw it. So it kind of almost goes beyond social media now.
It does.
AI is another another issue. So that's also making it a more toxic environment for women in politics.
It definitely is. Like, I think there's still a number of barriers. You know, like my two kids have kind of grown up with me in an elected role of one sense or another, and I do think we need to do a lot more about being family friendly. I know like there's been changes around the maternity leave and stuff in the Dáil, but I still feel we need to look at, you know, Dáil sittings and stuff that, to be honest, it's not rocket science to figure it out. So that is one issue I think we need to address. And then I do think we need to look at the whole, I suppose, not just social media, but as you're saying, AI, technological world, and see how we can better support women, because you do want women to come forward. It's so important that those experiences are there, and that there is balance for 51% of the population. It's important that our voices are heard, and I always think that women bring such a different perspective as well, and I like anything that we can be doing, we should definitely be doing to be more encouraging. And I think as well, even acknowledging the toxic nature and the toxic culture, because sometimes people are tempted to say, oh, well, it's not too bad for me, and that can actually be very isolating for other women. So I think when you call it out and you say it's not easy, it is important too.
Okay, and just finally, Sinn Féin and the parties that left work together to get Kathleen Connolly elected. Do you think there is a chance of the band getting back together again for the next general election?
I really hope so. I've always been a big advocate for the left working together, and we've had a very unique situation in Carlow and Kilkenny, kind of historically, where the left has worked really well together. So I feel like we were maybe the start, you know, of some of that stuff. But even with Catherine Connolly, like, it was something before we officially, you know, made our decision. I was really pushing that we would support Catherine, because I think it also gives great hope to people to see that the left can work together and that there can be an alternative to Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. I think it's actually imperative that we work together for the next general election and develop transfer pacts and try and ensure that we do have a left government. And I think that would be such a change in Irish politics, because it's always been, you know, we've never had a government without either Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. So I think it's really time, you know, we're over time for that to happen. So it's certainly something I'll be pushing. And I know, as I say, I feel we've always been really lucky in Carlow Kilkenny that we've had a really good working relationship.
Okay, well, Kathleen Funchion, thanks very much for joining us, and thanks for tuning in to Indo Politics.